Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graben.
Hi, it's Mark Graben. Welcome to episode 537 of the podcast for October 15th, 2025. My guests today are Caroline Greenlee and Chris Butterworth. They are two of the three co-authors of a book titled Why Care? Together, we'll talk about why caring, respect, and psychological safety are at the heart of lean and continuous improvement. We'll also explore what it means to truly build cultures of continuous improvement, how leaders can create workplaces where people feel safe to contribute, and how their work earned the Shingo Publication Award. To learn more about Caroline and Chris, the book, and more, look for links in the show notes or go to leanblog.org/537. Today, I'm joined by two co-authors of a book, two of the three. They are Caroline Greenlee and Chris Butterworth, along with Chris Warner. They are the authors of the book, Why Care? We're going to be talking about that book and their experiences and lessons for all of us working to build cultures of continuous improvement. Caroline Greenlee brings rich experience as a lean and continuous improvement coach, having partnered with organizations across different sectors to develop people and improve performance. Her background in lean is strengthened by her work in leadership, learning and development, and organizational behavior, and a master's degree in human resources, specializing in management and leadership. So before I introduce Chris, Caroline, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Mark. Lovely to be here.
And you are joining us from?
I'm from Northern Ireland, as the accent tends to give away.
Well, yes, I would say I've also learned never to guess. It's better just to ask because you don't want to be wrong with a guest. So we have an international discussion today for an international audience. So thank you, Caroline. And we're also joined by Chris Butterworth. He is an award-winning author, international speaker, and a certified Shingo Institute Master-level facilitator and faculty fellow. Chris has spent more than 20 years coaching executive teams and helping organizations embed sustainable improvement practices, always with a deep respect for people at the center of the work. So Chris, thank you for joining us. Where are you dialing in from today?
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm dialing in from the UK.
All right. And we last, speaking of Shingo, ran into each other at the Shingo conference. Was that last year? Time flies. Earlier this year. It feels like time flies. And hopefully we'll see you back at the conference in 2026.
Yes, we're actually both going to be there doing a workshop on the book.
And there is some Shingo-related news related to the book.
Absolutely is. We've been honored with a Shingo Publication Award just in the last few weeks, which we're both very pleased about.
Congratulations. Congratulations to all three of you. My copy does not yet have the Shingo seal that hopefully the publisher will update that and get that out there. But it's great recognition and congratulations again for that. So before we talk about the book and culture and psychological safety and the human side, that I don't know, that phrase always makes me chuckle a little bit. The human side of lean, like it's really all about humans. But I'm excited we're going to dig into that. I do like to learn before we talk about the origin of the book, individual lean origin stories. Chris, I know a little bit about yours, maybe a more, if you will, traditional manufacturing path into this. Maybe I'll ask you to go first and then we'll hear Caroline's story.
Sure. I really very long time in this field, so I'll condense it, but I was very lucky to be part of a leadership team at Jaguar Cars that built one of the early lean factories in the UK from a greenfield site. And I learned so much in that. It transformed the way I looked at the world, and we had people from Toyota and Nissan and Honda helping us. And that really kicked off my career in continuous improvement. I then did a 3-year research program in applying lean in supply chains. And then I spent 20 odd years in consultancy around the world, helping organizations. And in the last 10 years or so, I've been very much actively involved with the Shingo Institute.
So we have similar. There's some parallels of between you and I, starting in the automotive industry, being helped by people from other companies. I didn't have that greenfield opportunity. Ours was the brownest of brown General Motors fields. But what I'm curious, just one other question, kind of connecting your background to what you're doing now. Bringing concepts from the auto industry into other settings. I was just curious to hear your general comments about what you've learned from that perspective, changing industries and working more broadly.
No, that's really, really interesting question. It's a long time since I was in a car factory, and I actually deliberately set myself an ambition to try and understand how to apply the thinking in not just in not in car factories, but also not in manufacturing.
Mhm.
So I worked with many organizations in banking and insurance and the Ministry of Defense sector and education, just to really challenge my thinking and understand how this could be applied. And there was a long learning journey on that, but it boiled down to it's a way of thinking or what you're actually doing. And that was the big insight for me. And then that became grounded very much in the Shingo thinking around the behaviors and principles and ideal results requiring ideal behaviors, regardless of what you're actually doing. So as my understanding deepened, it shifted from tools to culture.
Yes. It's often said, anything we do can be described as a process. And again, everything we do involves people. Leadership and psychology, as your book covers so well. So Caroline, I'm going to point that same question to you of, how and when and where and why did you get involved with lean and continuous improvement?
Well, if I go slightly back into the midst of time, maybe not as far back as Chris, this is something more that I never thought I would be doing. I'm a language graduate by education, and I started off after college working for, on the date myself now, what was a new venture in the early 2000s, working for Annabelle and ran the French customer service team out of Belfast. And unfortunately, we were too successful. And at an outsourced team, what happens when you're too successful and you meet all of your SLAs is that you get cut off because hopefully expensive. And so I found myself then looking for a new job. And thankfully, Michelin, the tire company, was looking for graduates, and they were looking for graduates who spoke French. And so quite frankly, Mark, I had what we would call here notions that I was going to go and travel the world and eat in Michelin-starred restaurants and do all kinds of cool things. And vision met reality, and I was given a position in the tire factory managing the guys who made the tires. That was a big wake-up call for me. And so I did that for about 3 years. And Michelin, even in the early 2000s, was way ahead of its time in terms of lots of its people and management practices. So we had self-managed teams where the guys managed themselves on the back shift, 24/7 operation. People had empowered roles in the team that they took on and did things for no financial reward. And then the opportunity came where they were looking for a lean coach for the site. That was going to be a new role and something that they haven't really done before. And so I threw my hat in the ring and was fortunate enough to get that job and did that for, the best part of about 15 years, I think. So they gave me the learning and development role alongside that. And so for me, what seemed very normal to have L&D and lean, I found out whenever I came out of Michelin when the site closed, that actually those two things were quite different and quite unique. And where I saw learning and lean as going hand in hand, lots of people saw those two things as different.
Right.
You talked about the people side of lean. People didn't necessarily see the people and the processes as going hand in hand. They saw them as divergent and not necessarily leading to performance when setting up this false dichotomy between. too. And so I was fortunate enough to meet Peter Hines, who I just meet Chris, or with Cheryl Jiggill, who you on the podcast before, and we started doing some research around the people value stream and really learning a lot, Chris, on that and that what led to Thrive and all of that, and that's really then led on them to the book that Chris had already planned to write, but it had been put on ice due to some other things in COVID, and therefore then when I came back again, now I had the opportunity to work with he and stuff, so all now there.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. I think of Michelin. It's funny that you think of tires and fine restaurants. Time. I've never been in a tire factory. I've been fortunate to dine in a couple of Michelin star restaurants, but they know something about both. It made me hungry now, so I'm going to try talking about food. So, what led to the book? I'm curious the origin story for either of you that would want to start on this. To collaborate and to write a book about caring. That's a word come up in day-to-day business language.
So I'll take that because it's a story. It's a good opportunity for me to also talk about our other co-author, really smaller. We'll slip into calling him Stoffs because that's what we know him as, and that's what everyone knows him as. But Stoffs used to work for Toyota many years ago. He's a mental health advocate. He now works and has done for many years for BHP, the largest mining company in the world. And he's a CI coach and facilitator there, but he's also a mental health advocate. And as the company gives him time to talk about mental health and his personal experiences of managing mental health across the organization. So I was really lucky to be doing an on-site assessment on one of the remote mines with Stoffs. And we'd met before, but we worked together for a whole week. And they did a really good job on that mine when we were kicking around the feedback that we wanted to give and talking about it at the airport lounge, as often some of these things happen. And we landed on this thing that said, what, critical to continuous improvement is psychological well-being. No matter how well we design and implement a CI system, if we haven't thought about psychological well-being of the people, the CI system isn't going to work. The two sides of the same coin. So that was a discussion we had in the lounge, and we kicked it around and said, there's probably a book here. There's a good story to tell because we're not aware of anything where that story has been explained. So we kicked it around for a bit. We then said we need some help. We haven't got the expertise, so that's where we approached Caroline and said, would you be willing to join us as a co-author and give us all that the expertise that we were missing? And that's how it came.
Mm-hmm. So, Caroline, maybe a follow-up question for you. How would you define or frame psychological well-being? I mean, does that go beyond happiness and satisfaction with one's work? It sounds like there's a deeper impact on the people in a business.
Yeah, so psychological well-being is it's a continuum, Mark, and it's not something that you either have or you don't have it. It really is that continuum and that scale. And it goes, I guess, on the negative end to where you're just surviving and you're just barely making it through. And, whenever you look at the statistics today or around burnout and the fact that, you look at 2/3 of the population are having mental health problems, there's a huge swathe of us who are doing that lower end of the scale. And then all the way up on the positive end, then you've got what the positive psychologist would call flourishing, or we've decided to call thriving. And that's really that sense of where you feel really good and you can give up your best. And there's the alignment mark between your personal values and what it is that you do every day for work, whether that's in an organization or in the voluntary sector around that. So there's not just that sense of happiness, which is quite fleeting and not lasting, but there's very much that meaning and purpose and mattering all made up in that thing.
And the other And then that manifests itself when we get into the workplace, because people when we're not wrote that psychological well-being, it impacts our capacity to think. And so one of the pieces of research Caroline brought to my attention was, when under stress, your IQ drops dramatically. Now, not only your IQ drops, but actually the amount of capacity for you to think drops. So if we've got people under stress, we've got people who have not got psychological well-being, and there's lots of factors that will affect them. The more factors that affect it, the less capacity you've got. And even if people are in survival mode, they're in protection and they haven't got time to even think about continuity.
Great.
We're expecting people to make things better when we haven't thought about the psychological well-being. It's not going to work.
Is it fair to say that placing myself back into stressful situations, I think even personally, it didn't just affect my IQ negatively, but also my EQ.
Absolutely.
Getting those moments of stress, and you think about how, I think back to moments where I've reacted in a way where I'm like, well, that wasn't an ideal reaction, but it was a highly stressful situation, or trying to show a little grace to leaders I've seen react in non-ideal ways. What are your thoughts on that EQ connection as well?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark, because when Chris said about the IQ, and I was startled when I read the research on this year. So when you're anxious, you lose up to 40 points in your IQ. And if you're fearful, that goes down to 50. Like that's huge results, of your mental processing power. But also you can get triggered by situations, and stress is one of those, and you go into that limbic system of the fight or flight. And so that ability to pause and to choose how to respond goes, and you do go into that very much stimulus and reaction. And so you're not going, anxious people and people who are fearful don't behave well, and they don't make good choices. And we all have experienced that, whether it's at home, whether it's at work. And, I work as an executive coach, and I have a teenage daughter. I have a million opportunities every day to practice this. And sometimes I do it really well, and sometimes I really don't. And then I have to catch myself going and go back and repair and restore. So yes, all of this matters for work, but it matters for personal lives.
I really like a phrase Caroline uses in the book, actually, where she says that everybody is first and foremost a feeling being, as the ability to think. That ability to think gets narrower and narrower if we've not got that psychological well-being. So actually we respond emotionally rather than thinking about how we should respond.
Yeah. There's some other Shingo connections occurring to me. For one, when the late Stephen Covey was involved with the Shingo Institute, I saw him do a session at a conference. This might have been a decade ago, and he talked about the classic 7 habits framework of being able to put a pause between stimulus and response. That's something I've really worked on getting better at. It's easy to react and then to blame the stimulus. What are some thoughts you would have for me or the listener who is trying to work on that? How can we create that pause where we're more intentional about our response?
I think it starts with intention, Mark. Having that as an intention, and then it's about building habits and practices. And like most things, we're best to do all of this in community. So if you say whether you're trying to build a gym habit or you're trying to change behaviors, the more you can do that in partnership with somebody else who can help keep you honest and accountable, and also kind of bolster you and give you that. The main function of resilience comes from that connection. So sometimes we have to borrow that a little from others, so recognizing all of the times that you actually have that pause now that you maybe didn't before, and giving yourself a little bit of a pat on the back, and then recognizing, oh my goodness, like I'd gone from here to here whenever I'm only being triggered and reacting, and then helping to understand, ability to help you down, pick that thinking partner. When are you kind of hooked on something, and what could you start to do to either back yourself out of those situations or
Right.
get that off.
Yeah, I think, there's two possible countermeasures. One is to try to respond better, and one is to think about, if I'm in an environment that is constantly providing this stimulus, is that culture? Is that a culture I want to be a part of? Is that a culture? And it seems like this is very interconnected. Kind of a bit more yin and yang, chicken and egg situation. Your subtitle of your book refers to both thriving individuals and thriving cultures. It's probably not easy to say one leads to the other. They're probably intertwined.
But it is intertwined, and also we have a chapter on the thriving individual. We have a chapter on thriving teams, and a chapter on thriving leaders, and a chapter on thriving organizations, because they're all interdependent. And one of the things that is critical to that, and it builds on your question earlier, is that what we call the thriving plans. So these things, Caroline mentioned intent. Changing these things doesn't just happen by chance. We've got to recognize there's an opportunity and create. We have a template in the book for creating thriving plans for an individual, thriving plans for the team, and getting that peer support around you to help you understand, this is the help I need. And this is help I can give you. So you're sharing it to build up your competencies, build up your confidence in it.
So on the theme of thriving culture, how do you describe that? What are the signs you're looking for to get a sense of, this feels like it, realizing there's a spectrum, that this is a pretty good culture as opposed to one that's further from thriving?
Come try it on, Caroline?
Yeah, I can do. Like Chris, I'd be in a lot of organizations, like yourself, Mark, in a lot of organizations all of the time. And I heard the author Richard Osman the other day talk about, you get the vibes and there's that sense and you do feel it. You can walk into a culture and you can quite soon feel it. And I think it's the behaviors that are happening around you, but there's something about those nonverbal that almost resonate if you can tune in and into those, then you get to see other examples of people doing good things. Whenever do they walk past, do people greet you? Do they smile? How do people engage with one another? What does that look like? Does it look like a culture of respect and one of equal? Was it a meritocracy? Do the people at the top, do they all look the same, or is there diversity? Does the front line look very different from the folks at the top? So there's all of those things that you're kind of just. And it's amazing how quickly you pick up all of those signals and cues without necessarily even being aware of what.
And just to build to that, I think it also goes right back to the title of the book in terms of why care. Because what you see is people do care. They care about each other and they look out for each other. So the environment, what you see is a much more positive, constructive environment. That's what we see in a thriving organization, where people are not looking to catch each other out. People looking at, how can I make it better for you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you, Caroline. As a consultant and a coach, I'm quite often a visitor to an organization for a day or for a long period of time. And you can get a sense of, are people, is it calm enough where they can at least make eye contact and nod and say hello? I'm not trying to say I don't need to interrupt everybody who's doing something or expect them to drop everything to say hi to me. I think when I've toured, Toyota plants, people
We'll be right back
who've never
after
been
this.
in any car factory, they think like they're somehow picturing that it's going to be frantic and stressful if they don't understand what lean is about. And they would notice, like, well, in a Toyota plant, like, well, people are working with a purpose, but they don't look stressed out. They have the moment, they can wait. They're not told it's your standard work to wave and smile like they're working at Disney or something. It's noticeable. And then, I go into some organizations where like just people see somebody and they almost turn and run. Like they're afraid, if they don't know, am I management or am I a consultant? Does it mean somehow they're in trouble, as opposed we're there to help? Like I've learned not to take those things personally.
Okay.
But I want to talk about a little bit more to questions around thriving individuals that are hopefully part of thriving teams and thriving organizations. We're going to come back and talk about psychological safety, which is something we've touched on a lot in different episodes. But I want to ask first about something you write about psychosocial hazards. If you could define that a little bit more broadly before we talk about psychological safety. What are psychosocial hazards, and what are some of the most common ones that you would see?
Chris, do you want to take that?
Sure. So we have that whole section is written by our co-author Chris, and what we've got in there is a whole list of hazards which are recognized, and they could be at work and they could be at home. And a hazard might be bullying.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's something that's going to be a psychosocial hazard. It could be not working in a safe environment. I don't feel safe, not just psychological safe, and that could be physical. There are all kinds of different things. It could be that I've got a poor relationship with my boss. Boss is one of the biggest impacts on people's engagement at work, is that that relationship with the direct report. So what we have in the book is a list of about 10 different things, and then we have a way of assessing those. And that's one key part of the developing the thriving plan is to understand what am I against all these different psychosocial hazards.
Yeah.
And not like many things in lean, focus on the vital few. Yes, so they might tend to look at, but no, what if it's 10 all at once? So what are the one or two things that are really causing me issues at the moment? What's stopping me from feeling engaged, feeling able to contribute? Let's look on those.
So is that a necessary first step in organizational assessment or a lean assessment to first do a psychosocial hazards assessment? Be like, I think of like your workplaces I've been in that had a lot of bullying, a lot of abusive behavior from people with power. Like there's not a lot of improvement. There's not a lot of initiative that can happen, right? So
if you're seeing that, people often say, well, what can I start with lean? And the answer is, well, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a toxic culture, you have to start thinking about the culture. If nothing else is going to work, you're just going to be playing with tools and wasting a lot of money. Why have we got people that have got high levels of absenteeism? Why have we got people that are not engaged in the day-to-day activities? And actually think about, and one of the things to talk about is the role of leaders is to develop and manage the culture.
Right.
And so and what we're seeing in organizations where you see psychosocial hazards is that culture is not being proactively managed. At work, it could be happening at home, but even at home, we want then people to, in a straight environment, I remember many years ago, I went into work and someone said to me, all your feelings stay at home. I want you hang up anything to do with home as on the door as you come in, and it has nothing to do with work. Well, it's completely unrealistic because we're all actually going to carry it with us wherever we are. So what we have to recognize is that's going to happen. We have to look at the whole person and value the whole person.
Yeah.
Understanding what are the hazards that are affecting them outside of us is critical. So the assessment looks at both aspects.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was about to blurt out the word unrealistic. You beat me to it, Chris. I was thinking it. And, as an engineer, I've tried to, and as a human, I've tried to do a much better job of being in touch with feelings and recognizing that, what you're feeling is real. If you're happy or if you're frustrated, you can't just bottle up those feelings, or you probably shouldn't. Again, I'm speaking as an engineer, not as any sort of clinically trained person, because, I'm putting myself in the head a little bit of these, I'll say abusive leaders back in the day at General Motors years ago, where they may have said, they may have been thinking things like, people shouldn't take this personally. This is just business. I'm having to drive results and I have to let them know they're underperforming. So I yelled and screamed and cursed and belittled people. It's just business. And I'm like, well, that's not a business I wanted to stay a part of as a human.
And also, you're not going to get people's best thinking from treating them. I mean, if you look at the structure of the brain and all of those things,
Yeah.
what they're doing is running counter to the results that they want to achieve.
That's the irony of it, right? So, it's like, especially in healthcare, where you think of the disconnect where, people will talk about the need for evidence-based care, but then leaders don't necessarily act in evidence-based ways. Like you said, Caroline, they justify acting in ways that are counterproductive, or do they convince themselves that it's not counterproductive?
I don't know, Mark.
Generalized, which is unfair, but when we see people acting in abusive ways, like, it's interesting to think, like, are you unable to control that, or are you doing that intentionally because you think it's helpful?
Well, they just don't know any different,
So, tell us more.
Because what this goes back to what the role of a leader is to, to proactively define and manage the culture. So if no one's doing that, then what you get is the culture of the strongest individual in a particular area or team. It doesn't necessarily always be the leader. It could just be someone who's got a very strong personality, and they will determine the culture in that team. So if you've got people who are manipulative and play off people against each other, that's going to create a completely different environment than what we want. So if you said this is the start point and an assessment, I actually think there's a start point before that. The start point is to be really clear on, this is the culture we want, and describe it. And we want a culture where people thrive. What does thrive mean? Well, thrive means that they're happy to come into work, that we have high engagement levels, that people, we have high retention levels, that we have hundreds of people applying for each job we've got because we're a place where people want to come and work. So you got to set an aspiration, what you want it to be. And then you can assess where you are against that aspiration.
Caroline, maybe another question back to you. You earlier at least touched on ideas of diversity and representation. In the book, there's a lot that you all have written about DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Why is that such an important foundation for mental well-being, thriving people, and thriving teams?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, Mark. And I probably did more research for this chapter than I did for my master's thesis at university, because to have a brain is to have bias. I really wanted to try to make sure that what we presented was evidence-based from as wide a spectrum as possible. And if you think about it, diversity is about difference, and about inclusion was about having space and a voice. And equity is about making sure that there's a meritocracy, that we're all able to achieve the same outcomes, even if we're starting from different starting points. And the need to belong is hardwired into us, and we need to feel that sense of belonging. And in the absence of that, we feel outside. And if you think, back to our brain from evolved from whenever we lived in caves, and to be outside the tribe at that point of time was tantamount to death. And
right.
We feel the brain processes that in the same way. And the need to belong at work is second only to the need to belong at home. We don't have all of those things in place, and we don't feel like we can show up as ourselves. And that doesn't mean just like, show up, here I am, this is who I am, like warts and all, but we all go to work and try to be the best version of ourselves. But where I feel like I have to hide and take a whole pile of that emotional and cognitive energy, trying to kind of hide and have this facade of this, what I think this professional, perfect employee needs to be. And then I have no chance of building a connection with anybody else, because, they've got their facade of this perfect professional and employee. So it's critical, if we want to know what's really going on, and those people are our customers as well. So if we want to understand what our customers need and want, then we need to make sure that that diversity is represented within our organization then as well.
And I think it links very closely, Mark, to the Shingo principle of respect every individual. So, and as every individual for me is what makes that principle so powerful, because what we're saying is we've got to respect the person as in person they are.
Right.
We see it a lot where you get groupthink, where problems are not solved because the solutions that come up with are limited because the thinking is not diverse. Well, diversity is not just about skin tone or sex or gender. It's actually about the ability to get people who think differently to feel valued and work together, because the outputs then will be so much better.
Yeah. I mean, think of this language of respect every individual. There's a couple dots connecting in my head. Think of Dr. Deming's language of leaders needing to treat every individual as a unique individual, recognizing that we're not all the same. And, thinking back to the language, again, related to the Shingo language of respect every individual, whether we translate Toyota language to say respect for people or respect for humanity, I think whichever language you use touches on things you're writing about and talking about. We have to respect people's human nature, which on a more technical side might be, hey, people forget things and we get distracted, so we need to build in mistake proofing to a process. But I think part of that respect for humanity is, to your point, that it's unrealistic to ask people to not be human, to leave their emotions at home, or to not feel, as you're saying, Caroline, things that are very deeply rooted in our nature. To me, that's respect for humanity in a broad sense. So how do we operationalize that then, I guess, is the question. What are some of the traits of leaders that are helping people and teams thrive, feeling included, feeling a sense of belonging? Maybe this ties into psychological safety and feeling safe to speak up. Like what are some of the traits that you've seen or the research has shown are really most critical to creating a thriving continuous improvement environment?
So I'll do a couple and then I'll hand over to Caroline. But the several we focus on in the book, but two that I'll highlight. One is listening. Be prepared to really listen and demonstrate that you're listening. Listening is often really misunderstood. People feel valued when they're listened to. Often helps them to resolve the issue just by you listening properly to them. But and then the other one, I'll link it back to the second Shingo principle that cultural enablers, which is leading with humility. So that to create the safe environment, you have to demonstrate humility. That humility has many aspects to it, but actually recognizing that you can have all the answers, that everyone has a valuable contribution to them, also sets a completely different tone in the workplace than leaders who just tell people what's got to be done. So that's two of them. Do you want to
Caroline?
Highlight, Caroline?
How do they be curious and ask open questions and start to develop that true coach approach? So my experience of lead practitioners is we bandy the word coach about quite a lot, when actually what they mean is mentor, where somebody who's an expert comes in and is hands-on and helps somebody else do something. Coaching in its true sense of handoff, you don't need to have a subject matter expertise and it's a whole discipline in all itself. It's skills and behaviors that can be learned and to work on that mindset piece. And then that's really underpinned by the whole emotional intelligence. And, you look at all of the research that shows how phenomenally important that is for leaders and the link through from leadership through to performance. And I think the really empowering message around that is, unlike our IQ that is fixed within a few percentage points and as a function of our genetics, and thanks to our parents for that, our EQ, our emotional intelligence, can grow and develop all the way through our lives. What we have now is just a snapshot of a moment of time.
And I think one other that struck me is the power of kindness. There's a lot of research now coming out about the impact that small acts of kindness
Yeah. So I think maybe it's important. Let's step back and define kindness. So it's a word everyone knows, but people might have different associations with kindness. Like Karen Ross, who's been on this podcast before, talks about the difference between being kind and being nice. I don't know if there are differences in some of the terminology country to country speaking English, but are there different connotations? I wonder. But I mean, how would you define kind, or an example of kind that might not be the first example of kindness people think of? Like, holding a door for somebody. Like, okay, well, is that kind? Is that nice? But there's probably some
like opposites potentially being polite. Is it kindness? So I think kindness for me would be going out of your way to help someone unexpectedly. Would be an example of kindness. Mm-hmm. You're not doing it because it's expected of you, but you see an opportunity to help. That would be kind. Actually, I think a lot of language relates to this. So the way we say things and the words we use can also demonstrate kindness. So if we, for example, someone makes a mistake, what do we say? Do they get punished, or do we behave in such a way that celebrates and focuses on the learnings from grace? That's an example of a kind mindset. Mindset's going to treat people in a bad way.
Yeah.
I think there's also more the whole of the work of Brené Brown and the cheer is kind, and that sense of I'll tell you something or I'll share something with you. It's maybe difficult for me, or I've been really uncomfortable doing, but I recognize that it's for your benefit, or it's for the greater good. So there's not necessarily always an alignment between kindness and comfort. And actually sometimes to be kind, you have to maybe be not nice in the way that we were taught as kids, but it really is for that person's benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And that makes me think of, the idea that respectful behavior isn't always comfortable. Or, the idea of, Toyota uses the word challenge. And if you believe in people, that it's respectful to challenge them to perform to the best of their abilities and to help them in that process, I think that's respectful. And, psychological safety sometimes gets confused with comfort. I'm sure you've run across this. How would you help a leader understand what, psychological safety is not a matter of, feeling comfortable 100% of the time?
Yes, and for me, comfortable feels a bit laissez-faire. It feels a bit sit back and whatever's going to be will be. Whereas, if you think psychological safety is setting that frame for learning and trying to make sure that you're flexible and adapting your strategy so that each person feels that permission to be able to speak up and share. One of the really interesting pieces of research we came across and was the fact that the psychological safety is different for all different people. They're researched by August. And so that one, there's lots of behaviors and things in Amy Edmonton touches on those in her book, around how to use the frame and things. But it's also about recognizing that that's going to be different for all different folk.
And I think psychological safety is critical, but psychological well-being is different.
Yeah.
So we create an environment where people can speak up and talk with the psychological safety, but actually if there are psychological well-being issues that are not addressed and resolved, there's challenges still in that psychological safety.
In Caroline, you talk about Brené Brown's work, and people would often use the word vulnerability. I'm going to be vulnerable and as a leader, share something about myself that hopefully helps others feel safe to share something about themselves, the whole person, the human being who is there at work. But I sidetracked myself there because there's different. Sometimes connecting dots mean the dots are just colliding. And
just me that happens with Mark.
It's okay. It's just it's being recorded. No big deal. I'm being human here, so like my humanity, we get sidetracked. But I think I'm back on track. So there's leaders behaving in ways that help others feel like they belong and that they're included. Timothy Clark, so I'm thinking of, who has also done a lot of research and writing about psychological safety. In his 4 stages of psychological safety framework, stage 1 is inclusion safety. This might sound, it's, soft and nice to have, but it's a necessary foundation. Do not feel accepted and respected and included. Why would we expect them to take risks about saying, I don't know how to do something, or I think I made a mistake, or we could make things better? Like, people will protect themselves by shutting that down. And that doesn't mean they're bad people.
Absolutely. And if you think of problem solving, Mark, if somebody comes in and they don't feel that psychological safety and they don't feel that they can speak up, you think of all of the resources that are invested in fixing what isn't really the problem, because that there hasn't been that psychological safety in the first instance. You're cycling, teaching people problem solving tools and all of the cool things that you can do there and the structure from it, but also how do you create psychological safety, because it's so foundational.
Yeah, it certainly is. And some of that problem solving training goes to waste.
So one of the things we conclude in the book is that the design of any continuous improvement system, and there'll be lots of problem solving will be a subsystem within our whole improvement system, but the design of any of those systems needs to take into account psychological well-being. Have we designed these things in such a way that it will make people feel valued, even so that they can contribute? Or actually, they're going to be threatened by the way that we designed these things and just drop down because they'll think, actually, I'm not with that. That's just going to cause me lots of problems and upset people.
Yeah. And it's different if somebody is made uncomfortable by a colleague disagreeing with them or an employee disagreeing with them. That might be discomfort. I've seen people, unfortunately, try to shut down disagreement by citing, I think incorrectly, psychological safety. Like, hey, don't make me feel uncomfortable because, psychological safety, when shutting down that person from speaking up, that's the opposite, psychological safety. So maybe, as we start to wrap up here, how can we coach leaders? How can we coach humans? We can't just tell them, you need to be magically comfortable now with your employees disagreeing with you.
You have to value other people. Got to really think about it in terms of, how do I value the contribution?
And somebody can't fake that, I guess, right? If they don't value those people,
I think it goes back full circle, Mark, to that pause that we talked about in the beginning, really, doesn't it? And how do we create that pause in that moment so that we can step into the space of being the learner and letting go of that need to know? How do we let go of that need to be right all of the time? Because if we can step into that learning space and be curious and place that value on what somebody's telling us, then you're valuing the relationship as much as you're valuing the task at hand.
And it's okay to disagree. You can disagree agreeably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You cannot, many solutions only come about from rigorous debate. And if you don't talk about it, you're going to get suboptimal solutions.
I think whenever Terry Kelly was the CEO of Gore, who made Gore-Tex, and they're probably one of the most innovative companies in terms of their management practices, insofar as they elect the leader from within. But she talked about their meetings being like herding calves, because there was so much discussion and debate. But once they decided on the solution, then everybody fell behind it and executed it. There had been that space for that discussion.
Thank you both for, I think, teeing up some important discussion by writing the book and being willing to come and talk about it. I hope people will go check it out. I'm going to hold it up on screen for those who are watching. Why Care? The subtitles, How Thriving Individuals Create Thriving Cultures of Continuous Improvement Within Organizations. So we've been joined by 2 of the 3 co-authors, Caroline Greenlee and Chris Butterworth. Congratulations to all of you, including Chris Warner on the Shingo Publication Award. So you'll be there to accept that. Hopefully all of you at the conference.
Yes, we are all planning to be there in March. Yeah. So hopefully we'll catch up then.
I will definitely be there, and we'll look forward to getting to spend some more time with you, Chris, and Caroline, hopefully to meet you in person.
In fact, we're actually going to be running a workshop on the book at the conference.
Oh, great. So I hope people will check that out. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes to the Shingo conference, and people can go to shingo.org, learn more about the Shingo principles that Chris brought up. If you're unfamiliar with the Shingo Institute, there's really a lot worth checking out. So I encourage that, and I encourage people to check out the book. So again, Caroline and Chris, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.